in this business, and what I mean by this business is programming, coding, time is essential, time is critical. And I'll give you a little bit of background. I work for Everett Johnson, as you might have heard in the other room, and I have responsibility for a bunch of folks who do coding. And we write software for the clients of Everett Johnson, and we write software for the folks that work at Everett Johnson that help our clients. So it's very important for us to be able to not only write code that does something, but to write it very quickly, and very importantly, that it has to be very high quality. So we need to make sure it doesn't have bugs. Go ahead.
So you make the code in blocks? That's what you're saying you do?
In blocks?
Like the coding blocks to add features?
I'm sorry, I can't. Look, maybe I get up and I can hear you better.
So do you make the code in blocks?
What do you mean by blocks?
Like, to put together to make the app work?
So the question is, do we put the code in blocks? And maybe that's
how like their program works. Like they put in like an if block and then they put another block. It's kind of like Legos.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So I understand. So the short answer is yes, right? So when you code, part of what you do is you code in modules, right? And you don't have to code in modules, but it certainly makes it easier to understand the code if you're doing it as you described in blocks. So I have 1, 2, 3, 10 blocks, and they may interact with each other. One block may call another block. So we would encourage our programmers to code as you describe in blocks, because one of the things it does, it makes it actually easier to read, right? Because if I know this block only does this one thing, that's the one place that I'm going to go, because that block does that one thing. And I go to this other block, it only does one thing. And if they need to talk to each other, I figure out how to make them talk to each other. So it's a good question, because that is a basic principle of how a lot of people code. It makes code very efficient, right? And as I was saying, writing efficient code is absolutely critical, because you want to not only write it quickly, but you want to have high quality. So that is an important aspect of what we do. Anybody else have a question? He kicked it off, so go ahead.
What inspired you to do what you do?
Question is, what inspired me to do what I do? So I was probably a little bit older than you guys when I started coding. I'm going to name a computer that you very likely have never heard of, a Commodore 64. The old people in the room, have heard of that. That was one of the first, what we would call personal computers. Not the first computer, but one of the personal computers. And the reason they called it a personal computer is that you could actually carry it, right? The first computer is a computer by the name of ENIAC, 1948. I actually know exactly where that computer is, because I went to the University of Pennsylvania, and they actually have that computer sitting there behind a piece of glass that you could see it. Computers back then, and probably into the 1970s, would fill this room, right? Now we carry computers here, right? This thing probably has, not probably, it does have more power than that ENIAC computer that filled the room, right? That's how technology has advanced so much. So back to the question, my mother bought me a Commodore 64. I bought it to play games, or I wanted it to play games, and I did play games on it. But a funny thing happened. Just like you guys were doing in that back room, you had to code it. You had to code the games that you wrote. And once I started doing that, I became really interested in the idea of making a computer do something I want it to do, right? I learned that I can, make the computer, I can change the screen. I can create figures like you guys did and make it move. I can, bless you, I can do something that allows me to interact with the computer. I press a button, something happens. And it was a great way for me to learn what computers could actually do. And this was at a time, and I won't tell you what year that was, but this was at a time when people or the world was really discovering how to take computers and do everyday tasks. Things where, and I look around this office, I actually don't see a lot of paper, right? And you think about back in the 70s and 80s, if this was an office back in the 70s and 80s, there would be stacks and stacks and stacks of paper all over the place because that's how we did work and that's how we communicated. And the world is completely changed, and the introduction of those personal computers allowed individuals to do tasks that prior you needed huge machines to do, or a lot of paper, or a lot of people to do. So, when I got that first computer, what it did was really intrigued me, and I developed a passion for wanting to solve problems. Because one of the things that you're doing with those programs that you've written, you're solving problems. There is something that you want it to do, or there's a problem that needs to be solved, and you take a program and you solve the problem. So if you like solving problems, if you like puzzles, programming is the tool that allows you to solve those puzzles. And for the programmers in the room, it could be extremely frustrating, but when you solve the problem, it's incredibly rewarding to see something that you created and that you took some time to work on actually work. And even more rewarding if it's something that you're building for others to use, right? To see a program out there that other people are using and are benefiting from is incredibly rewarding. So to back to your question, I just developed a passion for it after getting that very first computer. And I've been working on computers for the rest of my life since. Unfortunately, I made the mistake at some point in my career to go into management. So I don't code every day like I would love to be able to code every day. And not saying that you shouldn't go into management, but I wish I still had the opportunity to code the way that I was coding when I was 13 or 14 years old. Other questions?
How long have you exactly been doing this?
You really want to know he asked how long have I been doing this? You really want to know how long I've been doing this? I would say this year I've been doing this for 30 years. See, that's the reaction I didn't want that reaction. I wasn't looking for that reaction. I've been doing it for 30 years, yes. Other questions?
When you first started doing coding, I noticed that it was kind of frustrating and I didn't like it at first. Was it like that for you?
The question was, when I first started doing coding, you said frustrating? So was it frustrating? And the answer is absolutely. Absolutely frustrating. Because coding, it's a language, right? You're learning a language. And think about if you know Spanish or you know French, or if you don't know those languages and you hear them, you don't know how to translate English to French or English to Spanish. And then you start learning a little bit here and there, and it takes time to master the language. Programming is exactly the same thing. And as you start to work through problems, it is frustrating because you may not know, the right syntax. Have you learned the word syntax? You know what that is? It's every language has the syntax would be the pattern that you need to use to write the code, right? Every language has commands, because I'm sure you learned the different commands that you needed to use to do the things that you did with your programs. Every language has its own unique set of commands, and they need to be ordered in a certain way. They need to be organized in a certain way, and collectively we call that the syntax, right? So, if you don't know all the commands and you're trying to do something, it could be very, very frustrating because you're not able to get through the whole thing and you got to go do some research. And I'll tell you something else. When I started coding, if I didn't know the language and I was trying to learn it, I had books about this big that I had to go through, reference material to go find the information that I needed in order to figure out how to code. Today, you can go on Google and do a quick search and it's right there, right? So very, very differently. So yes, definitely frustrating, but when you figure it out, incredibly, incredibly rewarding. Yes?
Did you ever create your own game?
My own game? I wouldn't call what I've created a game. Like what you guys have created to me is incredible. I've played around with doing some games, but again, when I started, the technology wasn't as good as it is today. So my games that I've created would not compete with the stuff that you guys created. Not even close.
So, what was that computer that you had gotten your first?
You're gonna look it up?
No, like I was just asking.
He's asking what was the name of that computer. It's a Commodore 64.
Okay, so.
And you can do a search and you'll find a picture of it.
And you say you could code on that.
Mm-hmm.
What did the coding blocks look like, if you even have coding blocks? Can you describe to me what they look like?
So one thing about programming is the languages, and back to the description that I use, learning Spanish, learning French. Once you're able to translate, it's learning how to say one word in a different language. So the way the languages look is once you learn one language, it's actually not that difficult to learn another language, because now what you're looking for is how do I do this that I did in this one language in this other language, right? So when you talk about coding blocks, there are common things that exist in every language. So an if statement, so what we would call a conditional statement. Every language just about has conditional statements. So a condition, if this condition, then do this, otherwise do this other thing. So every language has those types of statements. Loops, just about every language has the ability to do loops, right? Not every language has the ability to render something on a screen like what you guys did, but most languages would allow you to output something to a screen. Maybe not a graphical screen like what you guys worked on, but you can output something. So the coding blocks look the same, and I didn't look closely at the language that you guys were using, but I guarantee you that language is very similar in syntax or the way the patterns and the commands to other languages that exist. So your ability to create coding blocks in that language will translate to other languages that exist out there.
Like, the stereotype for hearing coding is using a bunch of numbers. Have you ever used numbers to code?
So repeat that again. I'm not sure I understand. What do you mean by that?
When you hear coding, you think of numbers and stuff.
So the question is, have I ever used numbers, and that the stereotype is that you use numbers to code? And I don't know if it's a stereotype, maybe something that TV, and movies promote, right? You see people that are coding on TV, and it's always, a lot of numbers and, crazy looking math problems and things of that nature. And, in some respects, that is one aspect of coding. But there's so much more to what you do in coding. So at a firm like Everett Jones, there is some math and there's some calculation. It is a financial firm, and if any of you have Everett Jones accounts, we do get the math right. You would hope so, right? So there is math, but a lot of it is if you had an account with a firm like Everett Jones, we are presenting information, right? A lot of it is the presentation of information. A lot of it is interaction with individuals, either gathering data or returning data. And some of it may have some math associated with it. And I don't know if this is a fact, but I would guess that probably makes up most of the type of coding that exists out there, right? Doesn't mean that there isn't math or jobs where there's a lot of calculation involved. There are plenty of jobs that do that. Engineers that are doing, might be writing programs that do some very precise calculation of something that they're creating. There's probably a lot of math involved there. Thinking about, like NASA and astronauts and, preparing to launch, satellites, and, they probably have a ton of math involved in the work that they're doing. So I don't know if I would make the stereotype, all math, because I don't think it is, but there's so much more to it than just that.
So,
How are we on time? I can stay up here. You got 5 minutes?
Yeah, about 5 more minutes.
Okay.
so what is Everett Jones? Is it a company or a person?
The question is, what is Everett Jones? Is it a company or a person? It's actually both. It's a company that was started by a person named Everett Jones. And, he started a company, I think it's probably 98 years old. The company, not the person, the company is 98 years old. He started the company because he wanted to help people that didn't know about finances and didn't necessarily live in big cities, right? So that the Everett Jones business started really serving, communities that were outside of cities. And to this day, a lot of our customers are still, a lot of those folks. But yes, both a person and a company.
So it's like supporting your company. Like
Supporting.
supporting company, like it supports people.
So the question is, does it support people? And the answer is yes. Well, I don't know if we would support, I would say support people. We help people with their finances. So if you want to plan, if your parents want to plan for their retirement in the future, or they want to plan for your education, going to college, they would work with us to help put that plan together and then put that plan into effect. So that's what we would do. And my group writes all the software that helps us do all of that planning. All right, maybe one more question. Anybody else? Yes. To do what?
If you could send a message to kids like us to at least try out coding, what would you say?
Okay, so the question is, if I could send a message or one message to kids like them about trying out coding, what would I say? And, what I would say is that we just have to kind of look around, and everything that we do is touched by computers. And in the next 20 to 30 years, literally everything will have a computer chip in it. If it doesn't already have a chip, it will soon. And what does that chip need? It needs to be programmed. It needs somebody to code it. So the jobs that are out there today most of them go unfilled by people that live here in the United States. We have to go outside of the United States to fill all the jobs that are available today. And you go 10 to 15 years out, those jobs are going to multiply. I'm not going to bore you with the Department of Labor statistics. I know the numbers, and they won't mean anything to you. But the United States is predicting that the job market in this space is going to grow by 28% by 2022. So there's a ton of opportunity in this space, and I would encourage you, if what you did back there was entertaining to you, and you find yourself being really inquisitive about, wanting to learn more about coding, and you feel some satisfaction in accomplishing something like that, then I would absolutely encourage you to continue to explore computers, explore coding. There are huge opportunities for you. And at the very least, even if you don't go into computers or coding, everything that you do, it doesn't matter what profession you choose going forward, it will interact with computers. And you having some basic skills, even some coding skills, will help you in just about any profession that you choose. So I highly recommend and suggest that you consider coding and learning a lot more about that. So with that, thank you. And I hope you've learned something from the work that you've done, and I hope I've conveyed to you the opportunities that working in this space will bring to you. So thank you.